All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everybody today to today's LinkedIn Live. We have a special guest joining us today, Gain Advisor Carlos Lugo. He's a hospitality technology executive, has experience with big brands like Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, ISG, but also independents. He's helping owners and operators to modernize, optimize, and really future-proof their technology stack. Carlos, great to have you here. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you. Thanks, Vincent. I'm excited today to bring some this topic that we really don't really talk about or doesn't make the headlines quite often, but it's absolutely foundational. And without the right infrastructure in place, even the best technology strategy just really falls apart.
Right. So you've worked with all those large groups like Marriott, Hilton, ISG, right? What is it that people really overlook when they talk about digital infrastructure? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times, most people think technology it just means what the guests see, right? And like mobile check-in, casting to the TV, AI chatbots, even mobile key, everything that kind of passes bits, right? But the real guest experience starts behind the walls, right? The cabling, the fiber, the Wi-Fi design, the network design, etc. So a lot of the things that often get overlooked are the aging or the inconsistency of the cabling, a weak Wi-Fi coverage, vendor sprawl, no tech standards across properties, and infrastructure technically is invisible until it really fails, and then everybody wants to dig into like what's the real issue.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of hotel owners and operators that worry about some of the greatest tools that are out there and getting the best technology in there into their hotel or even their new opening. But if the right data, the right infrastructure isn't there, it's really all worthless, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so exactly, right? And so when it works, no one notices, right?
Yeah.
But when it doesn't, really defines the state. One of the things that actually stuck to me about this is when I was one of the major brands, we'll have all these surveys, right? They'll go out to the guests,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. It didn't matter how luxurious the property was or what kind of deal was. If I was trying to work from there and I had a great experience everywhere else, and the Wi-Fi failed or I couldn't connect. We had tons of complaints that drove down our scores for that property, and it was an effect that to me was like, oh my God, they just had such a great time here. Everything else was great. However, the Wi-Fi failed, so they bombed the entire survey
Yeah.
just because of the Wi-Fi connectivity.
Okay. So what are some of the examples that you've seen um, that really impacts the guest experience when the foundation isn't there beyond that, right? Is this a huge problem for hoteliers nowadays?
I will say 50% of the time is a big problem, right? Typically, when the infrastructure is poor or you have poor infrastructure, the bandwidth collapses when occupancies go up, right?
Yeah.
And then cloud systems struggle because you can't pass bids fast enough and they can't communicate. Operations, they completely slow down because now they have to deal with complaints and not really cater to the incoming guests or the guest is already staying there. And then the brand trust and the revenue, they all take a hit. So essentially what I'm saying is you can have a really nice hotel or a great renovation of the hotel, but if the network is bad, right, you can really undo $1 million renovation in seconds, just like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. So where does AI come into play into all of this, right? AI works, from big data sources. It learns from a lot of the past experiences that guests had, right? And predict certain behavior. How does this all relate back to artificial intelligence, and especially around automation and predicting personalization? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, because AI runs on real-time data, right? And that depends on connectivity. Like if your sensors or IoT devices or your PMS can't exchange information fast enough, AI just can't learn or respond, right? And so that those are the things that we need to be cognizant of. That if we're going to deploy something like that, that has to be strong. But I've really seen like a lot of brilliant pilots fail simply because the hotels couldn't sustain bandwidth or just secure the device traffic, right? So yes, like AI without infrastructure is just demo tech in my mind. We have a variety of partners here that have researched and developed great AI solutions, and I get it. It is not the responsibility of those partners to make sure that the infrastructure is ready for optimal performance for their products.
Yeah, makes sense. So in an optimal scenario, how should your infrastructure look like? Do you have any experiences with hotels that, okay, yes, these guys really nailed it down, right? Yeah, like, do you have an
Yeah.
example like this?
Well, yeah. So I've worked with plenty of hotels where they have to do wayfinding, let's say, for instance. So the connectivity of where do I get to on the app and how do I get there quick enough? It's this massive place, right?
Yeah,
Those can frustrate people if they're trying to get around and they don't have good connectivity. But essentially, to somewhat answer some of your question on, the way that I will approach something like this would be with start with the digital foundation in mind, right?
yeah,
Like make sure you have a good fiber backbone like GPON, right? Corning does a great job here, or Cat 6 or Cat 6 Plus, right? Managed Wi-Fi 6 or 7, secure VLAN segmentation, and then proper power and cooling. Like I can't say enough about the proper power and cooling as well, because if these devices are running hot in the environment, it's just not going to produce good data throughput, right? And that's going to suffer. I will also say that in retrofits, right, like common mistakes is like skipping a low voltage design review, right? Like you can't retrofit connectivity cheaply later. It
yeah,
typically takes 3x, 4x more expensive, right, to fix that, after construction.
yeah. Okay. So why should a general manager in particular, right? These details, I think, are super important for asset managers, for example, or developers. From a general manager point of view, why should they care about the infrastructure?
Well, the general manager has to ultimately resolve for quality and making sure that the guest, right, that we deliver satisfaction for the guest. One of the things that comes to mind, is that we a lot of times we are solving for today when we have to be solving for what's coming next, right? So essentially, what I'm saying is, let's not build our infrastructure for 2020. Let's build our infrastructure with 2030 and beyond above, or so to kind of hit on that as well on the personalization side of things, right? And what does that digital future look like? Um, everything depends on throughput and uptime, right? Like if your network is flaky, right,
Yeah,
you're gonna have plenty of problems. So everything like cameras, sensors, IoT, quality, think about cameras and facial recognition and all the things that we're doing today. Think about mobile key in the guest journey from the moment I book my reservation to the moment I actually get to the property. How I get, let's say, my two fluffy pillows delivered to the room and my chamomile tea, right? And all these things to be automated. The lighting, the temperature. A good example of that. It just reminded me this week while I was in Arizona that I used Waymo for the first time, automated vehicles, right?
right. Yeah,
And one of the things I appreciate the most about that is not the level of autonomy, is the level of personalization. Like I get in the car, it remembers by my profile the color of the ambience I want, the temperature on the seats, the temperature in inside the cabin, connected to my Spotify, picked up from for where I actually left off on my last song, right? And then greet me on my way in, on my way out. So those are the things that we can accomplish today, but with the right infrastructure and the right workflows.
yeah. So you're saying there's a lot to learn from those kinds of industries,
I
that we can pick up some in the hospitality industry.
Absolutely, and it's there today, right?
Yeah,
So the way that we look at it today is like the way I would see is like when we talk PMS, I think about the heartbeat of the property, right? Everything else ties into that, kind of like your source of data, your the truth of the data on the property that you pile everything in and dish it out. From an infrastructure perspective, I think of infrastructure as the bloodstream, right, of the hotel digital ecosystem. So passing bids fast and consistently is really the name of a strong digital future.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So you've also spoken about that personalization and the need for real-time data, right? So how does infrastructure make all of that personalization that possible for, that's part of our, I guess the digital future, if you can call it that. Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So essentially, what happens here is that we got to have a mindset shift, right? In the sense that we need to stop viewing infrastructure as a cost center, right? We need to start looking at infrastructure as a growth enabler, right? The foundation of guest satisfaction and operational efficiency comes from that. So this has to be an ownership level conversation. The GM is not the one. The GM is going to be a person that's going to be able to, uh, you know, articulate what the pain points are to the ownership group, and back to the brand if it's a branded property. Um, but the ownership level conversation needs to happen, right? And so we can help you bridge that. If we're dealing with a guest satisfaction scores issue, a network delivery issue, connectivity issue, and integration issues, right? We can absolutely help with all that.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Um, if there's one thing that you could change about how the hospitality industry really views infrastructure, what would that be?
Yeah, kind of like what I was alluding to, right? Is let's not look at it as a cost center, right? Let's look at it as let's invest into what is going to enable our growth, is what going to enable our channels to distribute the data, pass the data, and have that optimal uptime. And I think that if we look at it from that perspective, we're going to be setting up ourselves for the future of technology. For now, it would just continue to be demo tech, but just pain points that we're not going to be able to resolve unless that blood flow and that bloodstream is actually passing through with no problems and no issues.
Yeah, makes sense. So if you can summarize the top three um, points to address when looking at infrastructure, let's say when you're pre-opening a or thinking about developing a hotel, what are those in your opinion?
Yeah, well, number one, it will be if your infrastructure isn't ready, everything you build on top of it will eventually break, right? So we have to make sure that we get our foundation right, and the rest, like AI automation, gets the light, all of that will actually work. But again, I can't stress it enough. Infrastructure is so crucial, and those are the things we don't see today. It's almost like expected. And I'll give you a little bit of information I've learned over the past few days is that right now there's a surplus of category 5 and 6 cable, right? 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be a shortfall, about 30 to 35% of that. Copper is infinitely recyclable. But the process of doing that and then getting the copper together again is going to become more expensive than fiber, which has never really been the case. So if we're going to think, guest first, digital first, the guest journey, let's start thinking infrastructure first, right? Because I think that's going to be the driver to enable everything else you got going on. And most importantly, a sustainability of what the future is to bring, right? So fiber first should be a way to look at it. Fiber to the room, right? So then we can deliver that content that everybody is expecting to get nowadays, and getting all that throughput and accessibility that a lot of places don't have today. So I think those will be probably my the way to look at it is let's invest in that infrastructure to make sure that we're future ready.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Then my final question: if there is a hotel out there that hasn't upgraded significantly upgraded their infrastructure for the last, let's say, 20 years, right? Do they just give up, or is there still a lot to improve from? And is it even possible as a hotel that hasn't really paid much attention to this?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because I deal with a lot of assets today that were not built IT centric, if you want to call it that, right? They didn't
Yeah,
have the right pathways. They were built in concrete and steel. Today, the technology needs to bleed, right, or have enough of a presence, right, to make an impact on that. So essentially, what they will need to do is get it future proof, right? If you have a lot of copper that's going bad or corroded and things of that nature, let's start looking at how do we future proof this property by bringing fiber to the room, or at a very minimum, starting with a fiber backbone, right? And connecting all your IDFs and MDFs right through a fiber backbone so that you can have more reliability. And then we can get into discussions about redundancy and all the other things. But the reality is that future proving, if you're going to make the investment, right, again, let's think about future proving that. Let's not think about solving this today and dumping the asset 2 or 3 years from now because we don't want to keep reinvesting and passing it on. Think about your comp sets around what are they doing, right? How future ready are they? And how does that really impact your bottom line if you don't compete?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much, Carlos, and I hope the audience thinks as well. I'm sure they do. Is there any final thoughts that you want to provide to the audience? Yeah.
Yeah, so let's get the infrastructure ready. Absolutely, I think there's a great opportunity here where automation and AI and enabling your staff of the property to give more of a white glove treatment to your guests and be more intentional and not have to be trying to put out fires instead of taking care of your guests. Right? Let's build some the foundation right so that the construction doesn't collapse on you.
Yeah. Okay. Perfectly said. Well, for anybody watching, you can connect with Carlos on LinkedIn, and you can learn more about our services, the Gain Advisors, and the hospitality innovation tracks at gainadvisors.com. Carlos, thank you very much for your time and your experience. And remember, the best guest experiences for us, in our opinion, really start with guests that they can't see, right? It's really the infrastructure is what I'm getting from this conversation. So really appreciate it, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.